Hello class, and welcome to Chapter 2 of our Introduction to Business class on making ethical decisions and managing a socially responsible business. I'm your instructor, Al Tacone. Great to be with you again, and I certainly hope that the class is moving along, even though we're just in Chapter 2, hasn't moved along that far yet, that you're enjoying your experience and that you're learning a lot about sort of our overview or survey about what business is all about, to encourage you to continue your studies and perhaps use what you've learned in this class in the workplace. All right, as you know, the lectures that you're viewing here on video through YouTube are also available in each Canvas weekly module. So right below, all of the lecture videos on video are the PDF versions of the lecture notes slides used in each video. Hopefully that helps you as you're working through your course materials and requirements each week. All right, let's get started as we always do with taking a look at our learning outcomes, in this case for Chapter 2. Pardon the typo there that says learn-in outcomes. How did I miss that? Oh my goodness, terrible. Well, anyway, here are our learning outcomes. There are 5 for Chapter 2, which again is all about making ethical decisions and managing a socially responsible business. And as I do that, I put my paper down over the return key. This might be an interesting video. We're off to an interesting start. Well, anyway, here are the learning outcomes. First, you should be able to define what philosophies and concepts shape personal ethical standards. That means as an individual. How can organizations encourage ethical business behavior? What is corporate responsibility? You should also be able to tell how do businesses meet their social responsibilities to various stakeholders and what the trends are in ethics and corporate social responsibility. All right, without further ado then, let's get started taking a look at kind of an introduction to why we study this particular concept or concepts in terms of ethical decision making and social responsibility. Because mostly if you pay attention to the news, especially in this day and age, scandals tend to shake certain businesses, like in the early parts of this decade, in the real estate, mortgage, and banking industries, where a lot of banking fraud took place, a lot of real estate fraud taking place, where people were getting loans that shouldn't have, and then ended up defaulting on their homes. Also, we should be asking ourselves, how do we restore trust in a free market system when those sort of things happen? What the legal answer has been is to punish those who have broken the law, to make accounting records more transparent, and to consider what is ethical, not just what is legal. So a lot of what is encouraged in today's business environment is to ensure ethical actions and responsibility, as opposed to just paying attention to what is legal and then perhaps taking some liberties in terms of what is legal in lieu of ethics. What's the cost of disruption? Well, some of these you might have recalled. Some are a little bit more recent than others, but you might recall the Bernie Madoff investment securities scandal. He is currently serving 150 years behind bars after running what's called a gigantic Ponzi scheme. You might want to look up, there was a good series, or I think it was a mini-series on, I think it was the History Channel, or perhaps one of the other channels that you can get on cable, but now it might be available on YouTube, called Madoff. You might want to take a look at that. It was a pretty decent documentary. I think it was in 2 parts, as I recall. The Enron scandal of the really early parts of the 2000s. Jeffrey Skilling is serving 24 years for accounting fraud. Richard Causey, part of that same scandal, pled guilty. He was released in 2011. And the former chief executive officer, Kenneth Lay, he died before sentencing. You might recall that, though I may be dating myself a little bit. And WorldCom, the former CEO, Bernie Ebbers, was convicted of fraud, conspiracy, and false filings, and he was sentenced to 25 years. So there are definitely consequences for corruption, and we're going to see how that all played out and what has transpired since, and how we can be much better in terms of our ethical responsibilities and social responsibilities as business owners and management. You might be wondering what exactly a Ponzi scheme is, and there's a picture of Bernie Madoff there. It is a fraud by which returns are paid to existing investors from funds contributed by new investors. In other words, initial investors invest in a company. There's no intention of the person managing the Ponzi scheme, in this example, Bernie Madoff, to give any return on those investments. The idea is to just keep taking more money in and paying those investors from the money that's being taken in. New investors are promised opportunities, claim to generate high-risk returns with little or no risk. That's how they are enticed into these schemes. And the fraudsters, in this case Madoff, focused on attracting new money to make promised payments. So the whole idea is to make the fraudulent return claims. For example, if you say to somebody, well, I'll give you an 8% return on your investment, there really isn't any investment taking place. What the Ponzi schemester is doing is taking new money that's invested and paying that as quote unquote returns, when in actuality nothing's being invested at all. And then, of course, the schemester is living pretty high on life based upon the money that's coming in. You might want to look up Madoff on YouTube. It's about a 4-hour documentary starring Richard Dreyfuss, so it's somewhat of has entertainment value, but gives you a pretty good idea of how Ponzi schemes work. All right, let's take a look at ethics. The reputations of American businesses have been under assault due to numerous scandals over the past 20 years. Following that, the law is only a first step in being ethical. Ethics are defined as standards of moral behavior and are accepted by society as right versus wrong. So if you are considered an ethical person, you are considered an individual who knows the difference between right or wrong. Let's take a look at some examples of basic moral values, difference between right and wrong. And that's what you see on your screen here. Somebody who conducts themselves using basic moral values have integrity, respect for human life. They have self-control, they're honest, they're courageous, and they're self-sacrificing. An individual who's wrong or does not use basic moral values would be an individual who cheats, is a coward, and is cruel. If you look at, for example, Ponzi schemes, not only is that individual cheating, but they're also coward in terms of the fact that they lie to the individuals they're taking money from and promising them things, and especially returns on investment that are not going to happen. And as a result, they're cruel because some of those individuals are giving those Ponzi schemists and other schemists their life savings, hoping and praying that that person is honest and is going to give them exactly a return on what was promised to them. All right, let's take a look at ethics in terms of us as individuals. Here's some examples of issues that may occur in your daily life that perhaps you can relate to in terms of ethics. Plagiarism, for example, from the internet or internet materials, is the most common form of cheating in schools today. Studies have found a strong relationship between academic dishonesty and dishonesty at work. So the studies show that individuals who are dishonest when they're studying in school, that's going to likely translate into being dishonest at work. There's a little cartoon to kind of illustrate this. Two individuals talking, and the one person on the left is saying to the woman on the right, I don't know what plagiarizing is, so I'm going to take the easy way out and just copy something off the internet. That is the definition of plagiarism. So what this study is saying is good habits regarding ethical standards of behavior should carry on to all aspects of an individual's future life. And those are things you want to keep in mind as you are being employed and as you hire individuals for the workplace. Now, as business owners, managers, individuals who work even in daily life or work for others, face ethical dilemmas. When facing an ethical dilemma, it is very important that you ask yourself 3 basic questions, and you see those on your screen here. Number 1, is it legal? Second, is it balanced? And third, how will it make me feel about myself? Asking and answering these 3 questions will prevent many people from making unethical decisions. Your questioning should always start off with, is it legal? And then if it's not, it should actually stop right there. You shouldn't have to ask yourself any questions further. But is it balanced? Meaning, have you taken into account all of the pluses and minuses, all of the positives, all of the negative aspects of the decision? And then third, how will it make you feel about yourself once you make the decision? So ask yourself, once you make the decision or you're about to make the decision, if I do this, if I make this decision, how will I feel about myself as a result of that decision? Ethics start at the top of any organization. Leadership helps to instill corporate values in its employees. So, like many aspects of business, ethical behavior practiced and modeled by managers and executives should often, if not always, trickle down to the employees at large. So the concept here is that if you're managing an organization, you're in top management, or actually any level of management in the organization, if those individuals are ethical, that will trickle down to the rest of the organization. And the assumption is, and I believe a very good one, that the employees will conduct themselves the same. If management is not setting that sort of example, then they certainly cannot go after or blame their employees for unethical conduct or behavior if it's acceptable amongst themselves. As a result, many companies have or develop what are called ethics codes. And there are two types of ethics codes: compliance-based ethics codes and integrity-based ethics codes. Companies develop these, again, because some individuals, if they break or they violate ethics, we want to have a policy in place to actually define what to the individual why they've been deemed unethical and what is the penalty. So a compliance-based ethics code defines a penalty. We emphasize preventing unlawful behavior by increasing control and by penalizing wrongdoers. So that means compliance-based, we're going to have a very strict set of rules that every employee knows and a very strict set of penalties that are well defined for each of the ethics code portions that are violated. On the other hand, integrity-based ethics codes define the organization's guided values. They create an environment that supports ethically sound behavior and stress a shared accountability. So what that means is we're not defining specific behaviors that we accept as an organization or the penalties associated with violating those individual items or individual parts of the code. Instead, in an integrity-based, you're defining guided values with the expectation that management and the employees of the organization will understand the difference between right or wrong based upon these guided values that we create. So some organizations may start with that, and then if they find that the integrity-based ethics code is not satisfying what it deems to be ethical conduct, then they may go to a compliance-based because they feel their employees need more specifics regarding how to conduct themselves and actually define what those penalties are so that they will not be unethical for sheer fear of being concerned about the penalties they may suffer, including losing their job, perhaps paying back money, etc. All right, let's take a look at how to improve America's business ethics. Some expert thoughts here, and I'm not the expert. Top management must adopt unconditionally support explicit corporate codes of conduct. Employees must understand that senior management expects all employees to act ethically. And third, managers and others must be trained to consider the ethical implications of all business decisions. So really these three aspects in summary are: number one, define and have a corporate code of conduct that's written, that everybody sees, and perhaps, if you go to number three, everybody is also trained on. And that's where number two comes in. Employees must understand the expectations of senior management. You may have training, which is number three, on the ethics conduct. It may be in-person training, could be webinar training, could be online training, video training, followed by a quiz or followed by a discussion amongst the employees. So just like when you take a test in a class, one of the things management must be sure of is that the employees do unconditionally support the code of conduct. So they have to test to make sure that they are understood. And I use the term test loosely. It's whatever way that the management decides to assess whether the code of conduct is understood and is being enforced. Number 4, in how to improve business ethics, an ethics office should be established within the organization so that employees can communicate anonymously. And as a result of that, those employees should have what are called whistleblower protections. Those are insiders who report illegal or unethical behavior. In other words, an employee who reports unethical or illegal behavior should be protected. In other words, should not expect and should be protected from any repercussions from being a whistleblower. In other words, not losing their job, being ostracized by their colleagues at work, being communicated with negatively, being retaliated against. That's a very popular term to define what whistleblowing protection protects against. Businesses should also involve outsiders, such as their suppliers, subcontractors, distributors, and customers. In other words, the expectations from an ethical behavior standpoint should also extend to those people we work with, inside and outside of the organization. And the ethics code of conduct must be enforced. In other words, the code of conduct will be useless if we don't, as management, take it seriously and we don't enforce it. Meaning that the penalties, as defined in the code of conduct, are enforced against those individuals who do not comply. Now let's take a look at, as from a management standpoint, how to prevent unethical behaviors. Here are some ways to prevent unethical behavior within an organization. Before you, or actually, when we take a look at unethical behaviors, you should always ask yourself what can be done to deter unethical behaviors on the part of employees. And that's where number 1 comes in. We have to communicate what the vision is about what unethical behavior would be considered within our organization. Increasing the penalty and educating employees are among the top methods for deterring unethical behaviors. And just as a little side note, 30% of the respondents in a recent poll, suggested adding new laws to deter unethical behaviors would help in terms of preventing unethical behavior within organizations. Now, with that said, although ethics is more than legality, if something is against the law, people may or must refrain from doing such behavior. However, it should be pointed out that ethics should be a way of life. For example, it needs to be ingrained in the employees of our organization through culture and role modeling by managers and executives. So the next couple of slides here are going to list ways that we can actually prevent unethical behaviors more practically. First, managers, I mentioned, should be communicating the organization's vision on ethical behavior to all employees. The organization should have a code of conduct, or code of ethics in this case. Code of conduct may be something different, so let me rephrase: code of ethics. Policies must be enforced regarding ethical offenses. In other words, what are those penalties? Ethical responsibility must be taught to all employees. That's where the training comes in. Organizations should have open discussions of ethics, and they must be included in the decision-making process. Accountability must be taken seriously at all levels in the organization. Organizations must act fast when a crisis occurs. Quick action will deter further violations of ethics. And finally, employees must know they have to defend and maintain the company's reputation. When you work for an organization, that should be first and foremost in the mind of the employee, and that occurs through the culture that you develop and your expectations regarding ethical behavior. Now, an offshoot of ethics within an organization is called social responsibility. And we're looking at bigger organizations here, so we're going to take a look at corporate social responsibility that is based on a commitment to such basic principles that we saw earlier in our ethics discussion as integrity, fairness, and respect. And for many for-profit companies, they have philanthropic endeavors as part of their mission. Communities often depend on companies to help with social programs that make the lives of people in the community better. It stands to reason that businesses that strengthen their communities, as proponents of corporate social responsibility argue, will grow stronger as their communities improve. In other words, social responsibility is not only conducting ethical business, but it's also giving what we call, quote unquote, giving back to the community by donating, participating in community activities, and so forth. Let's take a look at some examples of what that means, or what form corporate social responsibility can take place. Here are a couple of examples: corporate philanthropy and corporate social initiatives. Philanthropy mostly deals with charitable donations. In other words, contributing a portion of the company's profit to local charitable organizations, whether it be Boys and Girls Clubs of America, United Way, medical, for example, Red Cross, Cancer Society, etc. In other words, they build it into their budget and they make sure, or they ensure, that it is part of their priorities as an organization. The second example is corporate social initiatives. For example, it includes enhancing forms of corporate philanthropy. In other words, you see a good picture here, is we may not only be donating to an ecological initiative within our community, but perhaps our employees actually volunteer their time to go out and help clean an area, clean the beaches, or in this case, clean the areas surrounding a local park. So it's besides just contributing money and saying, here you go, use the money as you wish, to help with a social aspect of what needs to be addressed in our community, but we also take the initiative to participate, would be a perfect example, or allowing community members perhaps to use our facilities for meetings or other organizational events as a way of reaching out and being more socially responsible. Our organizations may have corporate responsibility policies. Corporate responsibility, as you can see here, includes everything from hiring minority workers to making safe products, minimizing pollution, using energy wisely, and providing a safe working environment. Those are great examples of how we may be responsible overall from a policy standpoint. And that gets defined in the actual corporate policy, and that is the position a firm takes on social and political issues. For example, we may have a policy on saving energy. So an organization might say, just a simple example, we're going to operate our business in the overnight, because that's when there's less strain on energy resources within the community. Thereby, not only does it save us money, but it's also going to help to save the consumer money because we are absorbing less energy during the peak times of operation. Let's take a look at some examples of certainly unethical behaviors that you might recognize, and this hopefully rounds out our discussion to help you to get a little bit more understanding on exactly what unethical behavior involves. Here's the example of insider trading. You might have heard of that term. This is where insiders, such as people who work within the stockbroking industry, they're actual stockbrokers, for example, use private company information to further their own fortunes or those of their family and friends. In other words, if you're a stockbroker and you hear about a company is about to issue a stock split, and you know there's a lot of money to be made by buying up a whole lot of stocks, and you use that information to benefit yourself, a relative, or friends, that is insider trading. That is unethical behavior, and it does financial damage to a company, and investors are cheating. In other words, we're not going to be speaking a lot about stocks in this particular class, but from a finance standpoint, if a lot of stocks are purchased at one time, it takes stocks out of the supply of stocks, thereby increasing the price. So that hurts the company, but also investors are cheated because the legitimate investor is not going to have the same opportunity to buy stocks as those who you gave insider trading information to. Let's take a look at the same issues from a responsibility to our employees standpoint. By being socially responsible and ethical, the result is the creation of jobs that provide a chance for our employees to have upward mobility, getting better, bigger, and better jobs within the organization that perhaps results in greater amount of financial reward through pay and benefits. We treat employees with respect, and we offer salaries and benefits that help employees reach their personal goals. Those are all ways that we can employ social responsibility to our employees. And as you might recall from Chapter 1, when we studied aspects of economics, these issues or aspects certainly can help the economics of our country, especially if you look at bullet point number 3 there, where salaries and benefits are involved. If our employees are paid a fair wage, those wages are in turn spent within our economy, thereby contributing to the ongoing and positive economic flow within the United States. So those are 3 great examples of how we are responsible or can be responsible to our employees. And if we're not, and if our employees are upset by the fact that we are not socially responsible with them, they may tend, or the tendency is, I should say, to commit fraud. Employee fraud in the United States costs about 5% of the annual revenues of the businesses in the U.S., and it causes 30% of all businesses to fail. That's just employee fraud, meaning they do the things that you see in the bottom part of the screen. Employees who do not feel they've been treated fairly, ethically, or responsibly, they blame mistakes on others. They can manipulate budgets and expenses. In other words, they perhaps are stealing or moving expenses to where they don't belong so they can steal money or other resources. They make commitments that they intend to ignore. They promise they're going to do something, they get paid for it, and then they don't follow through. They may hoard resources, meaning they're going to keep resources to themselves or a small group of employees and not share for the better good of the company. And they do the bare minimum, meaning they're going to come in, perhaps do their work to the letter of their agreement or their contract or their collective bargaining agreement, but they're not going to do any more than that, and they're certainly not going to have the kind of care and respect for the organization that somebody who is being treated ethically and socially responsibly. All right, let's take a look at social responsibility from the environmental standpoint. Here's some ways that a business can be socially responsible to the environment. Environmental efforts can certainly increase cost, but they offer good opportunities, including the goodwill that we provide to our community by being recognized as an organization that cares about the environment. The emerging renewable energy and energy efficiency industries in the United States account for about 9 million United States jobs. So by being responsible to the environment, we are contributing to job creation in the United States. And again, if we refer back to what we studied about economics, we know how job creation can positively impact our economy and the circular flow. And a study has shown by the year 2030 or 2030, as I'm told we're supposed to say that now, as many as 40 million quote-unquote green jobs will be created. So not only do we have emerging renewable energy and energy efficiency industries accounting for 9 million United States jobs, but we expect that to grow to have 40 million more jobs related to the environment created by the year 2030. So how does an organization determine whether or not it's doing a good job in terms of social responsibility? Well, one way is that they can is to conduct something called a social audit. That is a systematic evaluation of an organization's progress towards implementing socially responsible and responsive programs. There are 5 organizations out there in the public sector that are watching what we do as an organization from a social responsibility standpoint. They're categorized as socially conscious investors, those people who will not invest in a corporation that is not being socially responsible. Socially conscious research organizations, organizations who actually, usually they're nonprofit, but they could be profit, who specifically research organizations and report, give a report card on how they are doing regarding social responsibility in an attempt to encourage consumers to buy only from socially responsible organizations and to quote unquote boycott those that are not. Environmentalists are watching what we do and reporting on what we do in terms of environmental social responsibility. Union officials, in terms of our social responsibility to our employees, they're watching those organizations and reporting on those who are not conducting themselves in a social responsibly manner, as we discussed earlier with our employees. And of course, customers. The customers, most important to our revenue generation and to our profitability and existence. They watch us, and there are some customers who will not purchase from organizations that are not socially responsible and those who are not ethical. They want to support only those organizations that they feel are conducting themselves ethically and socially responsibly. And if they don't purchase from us, obviously that hinders our ability as an organization to earn profits. And finally, just a word on international ethics, because many businesses today operate globally as an essential way of generating revenue. Many businesses do want to be socially responsible with their international suppliers or their international communications, international consumers. In the 1970s, the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act criminalized the act of paying foreign businesses or government leaders in order to get business. So that's eliminated. That is illegal. So it's not only unethical to pay a foreign government to do business with your business in the US, but it's also illegal as of the 1970s, which was a long time ago for some of you. Well, actually, even a long time ago for me. Some of you may not have even been born then, but here's a hint, I was. And finally, partners in the Organization of American States signed the Inter-American Convention Against Corruption Act. So that actually those are written documents, or I should say legislation, that ensures that we conduct ourselves ethically with our international business, and so you don't have to depend on it be solely something that is organizational practice. They are actually legal. And as you might hear, I am actually video taping live. That was a horn of somebody's alarm who went on outside my office window here at my home. So it's happening real time. And that actually is the end of our Chapter 2 lecture. As I mentioned earlier, and as is always, a PDF version of the lecture notes are always available in the chapter and weekly modules in Canvas. They're located right underneath the link to the lecture videos for each of the chapters. I hope that helped you in getting started and studying Chapter 2 on making ethical decisions and managing socially responsible businesses. Again, these lectures are meant to be an overview and to give you a good thought on how to progress with your requirements each week. That does include reading the chapter and certainly using all of the materials that are available to you here and anywhere, actually, to complete your weekly requirements. All right, I hope that worked well for you. I'm looking forward to being back with you on or with Chapter 3. Have a great week.